The list for level 7 sorcerer spells is very small, but that's actually a good thing. Remember that as a sorcerer, even for Clockwork Soul and Aberrant Mind, you'll probably only be able to know one 7th level spell. Keep that in mind when considering your spell choices or planning your character. This applies to 6th level spells as well, but 7th level spells are mostly all circumstantial, which means that your spell selection at lower levels should include several spells that are going to scale well, so that if there is a certain instance where the 7th level spell that you know is not going to be proper for that situation, you'll be able to upscale a lower level spell that's actually going to be efficient, cast as a 7th level spell. And luckily, having a small list to choose from can make your selection a little bit easier than if the list were bigger. Today we'll be diving into each spell individually and analyze their usefulness within the Sorcerer class to help you make that selection. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I am your innkeeper, and today we'll be talking about 7th level Sorcerer spells. Before we begin, I wanted to thank my patrons. Thank you guys for all the support. And if you like this video, make sure you click like, subscribe, and also check out the Patreon in the video description. In this video, we're going to go over each spell available to the Sorcerer spell list and talk about the Metamagic options that would synergize the most with each spell individually. At the end of each spell's analysis, I'm going to post a summary of the Metamagic that's going to work with that spell, the ones that are so-so, and then the ones that don't synergize at all. At the end of the video, I'm going to post a list of the spells that I highly recommend, the ones that are solid options, the ones that are circumstantially good, and the ones that I don't recommend you ever take. So let's go ahead and get started. Starting with Crown of Stars. This spell takes an action to cast and creates 7 motes of light that orbit around you. As long as you have 4 more motes, then you shed bright light for 30 feet and dim light for an additional 30 feet. If you have 3 or less motes, you only shed dim light for 30 feet. The spell lasts an hour and doesn't require concentration, which makes this spell really good for dungeon delving and exploration, especially when you tack on the additional benefits of the spell. But the light benefits aren't why you cast this spell, it's actually the combat benefits. Once you've cast this spell, you basically gain a bonus action ability, which is going to allow you to make a ranged spell attack against a creature or an object within 120 feet. If you hit, you're going to deal 4d12 radiant damage on your target. Each time that you use your bonus action ability, you lose one of your 7 motes that float around, which means that this spell is going to give you a total of 7 such attacks, and then the spell is going to end. The spell is really, really good overall, and it can really add some firepower to your arsenal. Whether you're a blaster or a controller, the fact that this doesn't require concentration and making the attack is only a bonus action means that you're basically freed up to do other things, including do additional damage, control, or tactical maneuvers to keep yourself safe. It's even better that once the spell's been cast, the bonus action ability that you gain isn't considered spellcasting, which means that you can use your action to cast additional leveled spells without having to worry. Now, of course, if you're going to plan on using the spell repeatedly, then it might be time to think about your Metamagic selections. If you have taken Quicken Spell and somehow you're able to remove it, I would select a different Metamagic at this point, because if you're going to be using the spell quite a bit, Quicken Spell is not really going to help you much, since you have already going to have your bonus action in use by the spell most of the time when you're in combat. Now, what makes this spell even more versatile is the fact that it allows you to target objects in addition to creatures. That means that you can potentially use it to break through barriers in a dungeon, destroy traps from 120 feet away, and even full enemy plans that have to do with some kind of object or MacGuffin or whatever, and you can shoot at it and destroy it from a remote area. As far as Metamagic, only Extended Spell and Quicken Spell really work on this spell. Extended Spell doubles the duration to 2 hours, which if you're exploring a dungeon is actually fairly significant, and Quicken Spell, on the other hand, is not going to synergize well with this. In fact, it's going to hinder the spell. If you quicken the spell, the round where you cast it, you're not going to be able to use your bonus action ability to attack. So you don't want to quicken it. Use an action to cast it, so then that same round you can attack with your bonus action. Now, If you're out of combat when you're casting the spell, then quicken might help, because then you can quicken the spell and then do something else with your action. But I think those kind of instances are going to be very far and few in between. This spell does allow you to upcast it, and if you do, you get 2 more motes for each level of spell that you use above 7th. This is not something that I generally recommend, since getting 2 more motes is not really very impactful, and 8th level spell slots are very valuable and scarce. But to be fair, there are very few level 7 spells that I'd recommend upcasting, so it's nothing bad for me to say that this spell is not one I'd recommend that you upcast. Next up is Delayed Blast Fireball. This spell is very circumstantially good. You can choose a point within 150 feet and basically create a glowing ball that explodes either at a moment you choose within a 1 minute period, or if you lose concentration, which may or may not have been your choice. Once the ball explodes, it damages everything in a 20-foot radius sphere emerging from it. The base damage is 12d6, but every round that you concentrate on this spell without detonating it, the damage increases by 1d6. Since the maximum time that you can concentrate on this spell is 1 minute, or 10 rounds, the maximum damage is 21d6, unless your Dungeon Master rules that concentration ends at the beginning of round 11, in which case the max damage is going to be 22d6. With Extended Spell, you can potentially eke out an additional 10d6, making this a total of 31 or 32 d6 damage, which sounds like a tremendous amount of damage. But the fact that it's a 1 minute duration makes it very difficult to maximize this. If you're using this outside of combat, like say you're running away from a group of enemies or foes that are chasing you and you want to blow them up as they get to you, the timing is going to have to be perfect, which is highly unlikely to work out, at least for you to maximize to that large amount of damage. Usually if foes are chasing you, they're either right up on you, as in like a 1 or 2 round distance, or they're so far behind on your trail, which is usually farther than 1 minute away from you. So you won't be able to nail them with it in that case either. So if they're just a round or 2 behind you, you're going to eke out maybe an extra d6 or 2 of damage. And if it's the latter, then you're not going to be able to really nail them with it. In combat, the spell is really not much better. Generally, you want to do damage right away in combat, not wait 10 rounds in order to be able to dish it out. If somehow you wait the full 10 rounds, then enemies are probably going to be already pretty badly hurt. And getting, all that additional damage added to the base damage of the spell is probably going to be just overkill and pointless. Or if you wait the full 10 rounds, sometimes the combat is going to be long over, which most likely is going to be the case because most combats last about 3 to 4 rounds anyways. Not to mention the fact that combat can be very dynamic, and a floating bead that doesn't move for several rounds is likely to lose its tactical advantage after a few rounds, potentially becoming more of a hazard to your group, and it's going to end up harming your party more than it's going to end up helping. So in this case, for combat-related purposes, why not just upcast Fireball to 7th level? It's going to do the same base damage of 12d6 and in the same 20-foot radius, and you can use your 3rd level known spell for the exact same thing instead of taking up the very few known 7th level spells that you're going to have to learn Delayed Blast Fireball. I mean, just get another spell in that case. Now, are there times where Delayed Blast Fireball can be really useful? Yeah, definitely, but I think it's so ultra circumstantial that it's just not worth taking, to be honest, especially since the moments where it can be better than an upcast Fireball are so few and far between that it's just redundant to have if you have the option to take Fireball earlier on in your adventuring career. Now, I know that you can also grab the bead and hurl it up to 40 feet, but 40 feet is not that far. It's actually kind of dangerous to be doing that kind of thing, grabbing it and throwing it only 40 feet. You're really up close to whatever you're throwing it at, and the distance of 40 feet is not significant enough where it's really going to make an impact. I'm sure there's going to be 1 or 2 circumstances where that did come in handy for you or something, But generally speaking, that's not something that I would count on in any given combat. So the ability to pick it up and throw it, not that good. Too risky, way too risky. And then it gives the enemy, the fact that you can pick up this bead, gives the enemy the option to pick it up themselves and hurl it far enough away where they're safe from the damage. So, or maybe even throw it back at you. So it makes the spell even less effective in that case. Now, when you upcast this spell, the base damage increases by 1d6 for each slot above 7th level. And that is just hilariously bad. I mean, using an 8th level spell slot for an increase of 3.5 points of damage is so laughable. I mean, I don't know why anyone would do that, or why this is even an option for this spell. So whatever you do, don't waste an 8th or 9th level spell slot to upcast this spell, no matter what. In fact, probably don't even take this spell. Next up is a Tasha's Cauldron of Everything spell called Dream of the Blue Veil. This spell is a campaign and story tool more than an actual player character spell, so I'm not really going to talk about it here, so we're going to go ahead and move on. Next up is Etherealness. This spell, is it Etherealness or Etherealness? I don't know. I'm Hispanic. I would have pronounced it Etherealness or Etherealness, but I've heard a lot more people say Etherealness, so I guess that's how you pronounce it. Anyways, this spell immediately transports you to the ethereal plane. You can see into the prime material plane, but your vision is limited to 60 feet, which is not super great, but hey, it's something. The spell is not clear on whether the lighting conditions in the prime material plane affect your visibility while you're in the ethereal plane, but my interpretation is that you can see into the prime material plane regardless of the lighting conditions. But it's worth checking with your Dungeon Master to see how they rule on that. While you're there, you can't be affected by things in the prime material plane like poison, gravity, or walls. You can even move up or down, but it does take a little bit of extra movement for you to do so. Clearly, this is a utility spell and mostly usable for exploration, although it can be used to escape a dangerous situation, and you can use it to infiltrate enemy camps and spy on them, that kind of stuff. You can see what's inside a dungeon, and there's plenty of other uses that you can do with it. You can even use it to get past areas that would normally be impossible to get to. So pretty straightforward, pretty circumstantial. Where this spell really shines is actually when you upcast it, because when you use an 8th level spell slot, you can bring up to 2 other willing creatures with you to the prime material plane, plus yourself. Use a 9th level spell slot and you can bring up to 5 additional willing creatures, which is probably enough to bring your entire party along. The usefulness of this spell really skyrockets when you can bring the whole party and then just all walk through the ethereal plane, check out the dungeon before you go exploring it, and you don't have to split the party to do so. Now, extended spell is going to be the metamagic of choice here because it doubles the duration to 16 hours. The only other metamagic that works with this one is subtle spell, and as is the case with subtle spell, there's times when that can definitely be useful, but it's just situation dependent. Finger of Death. This is a single target blast spell that I think is very subpar. First of all, the range of 60 feet is way too short of a range for a 7th level spell. At the level that you can cast this, 60 feet usually means that you're going to put yourself in the way of harm in order to cast this spell. I would say that this might be worth it if this spell dealt good enough damage in order to justify it. Also, this spell grants a Constitution saving throw for half damage. Constitution is a saving throw that most enemies are going to be at least decent at, so it's by far the least favorable saving throw for casters to force upon a target. Plus, the damage output really isn't that great. 78 plus 30 is 62 points of damage on average, which on the surface seems decent, but it's necrotic, which a lot of undead creatures are resistant to, and at the level that you can cast this, you'll be probably facing a lot of undead creatures. Now, granted, your campaign may have no undead creatures, in which case this might be a little bit better. But most campaigns at this level, you are fighting quite a bit of undead, so you're not going to be able to use it for that. But even if your campaign doesn't feature a lot of undead creatures, the Constitution saving throw makes it more likely that the enemy that you hit is only going to take half of the damage that you deal. Now, this spell has an additional creature in which a creature killed by the spell rises as a zombie under your control. At this level, a zombie is not really going to do that much for you other than help you for utility and exploration purposes, so don't expect this to be a huge combat benefit unless you want to have a zombie army and go around casting this on your downtime, killing innocent people so that you can bring them back as zombies. Then you can get a whole zombie army, and that could be pretty strong, since the zombies that you raise are loyal to you and there's no expiration date, unlike Animate Dead that only lasts 24 hours and you have to recast it. Once you raise a zombie with this spell, it's permanently yours. So you could potentially have a huge army of zombies by using this out of combat. But that is an evil act, killing innocent people just so you can have your zombie army. So, have at it if you're playing an evil campaign or if your DM or your group kind of plays that way, but I think in most campaigns this is not something that you're really going to want to be doing. Distance spell can be used on this to help keep you at a safe distance, basically making the range 120 feet, so I would highly recommend using distance spell if you're going to be casting this whenever possible. Empowered spell won't boost the damage by much. I've said before, empowered spell is more for area of effect blasts because the increase in the damage is really going to multiply when you're hitting multiple targets. This being a single target spell, I don't recommend empowered spell, although it does work on it. Now, because it is a single target spell, you can heighten spell, and in that case, give them disadvantage on their Constitution saving throw, make it more likely that you're going to do or maximize the damage that you were originally going to do to them. So you can do that. It's 3 sorcery points to heighten. Is it worth it? Most of the time, I would say probably not. Now, you could twin this spell and hit 2 creatures for quite a bit of damage, but even though that's really good, at this spell level, you're spending 7 sorcery points to twin this spell. So I personally don't think it's worth it. Upcast a Fireball if you want to hit multiple creatures, and then you'll be gravy right there. So overall, I can't say that I recommend this spell. Next up is Firestorm. This is a great area of effect blast spell. It's on my list of top 10 area of effect blasts, actually. It has a good range of 150 feet, and the area of effect is huge, consisting of up to 10 10-foot cubes, and potentially affecting 100 cubic feet, which is really, really big area of effect. The fact that you can split it into cubes that just have to be connected on one side is awesome, because you can potentially scope the spell around your allies, keeping them safe from enemies, and be able to nail all the enemies in a battlefield. That's what makes this spell so awesome, because unlike a fireball that's going to hit your allies, this spell is kind of like a built-in safety net where you can avoid hitting your allies and still maximize the range and area of effect of the spell and hit as many enemies as possible. Each cube has to be adjacent, like I said before, but even with that requirement, it still gives it tremendous flexibility, because you can have a cube here, and then another one on this side, and that kind of thing. So it's really, really potentially able to be moved around into an interesting shape that can nail quite a bit of things. And actually, you can even stack it up high, so you can nail a flying creature up to 100 feet up. That's pretty awesome as well. Any creature within the cube is going to take 7d10 fire damage. Not bad. A dexterity saving throw prevents half of the damage, and the amount of damage is not tremendous, but 7d10 is not that bad. And it's fire, which is commonly resisted, understandably. Dexterity saving throw, not very ideal, but it is better than a Constitution saving throw. So why do I like this spell, even though the damage isn't that great and the saving throw isn't like the best one? I think that the range and the area of effect are really good, but really the flexibility is what makes the spell shine. So if you're caught up in a complicated melee, you don't have to worry. You can still blast away and keep your ally safe. You can use Careful Spell on this, but you're probably not going to need to, since you can create panels and keep your ally safe. And anyways, Careful Spell is not one that I'd recommend using on a blast spell because your allies are still going to take half damage. So keep them safe just sculpting around them. Distance spell is always good for a blast spell, but the range of the spell is so good, you probably aren't going to need it. And you can empower this. You can empower this and deal a ton more damage because you're going to hit a lot of creatures. So the more creatures you hit, the more that empower spell is going to boost your damage, basically. And one of the best metamagics I think that are going to be really good on this is Transmuted Spell, because at this level, a lot of creatures are going to be resistant to fire in a lot of campaigns. You can transmute it and make it another damage type for which the creatures or your targets are not going to be resistant or immune. So if you're a blaster, I would say definitely consider taking this spell for 7th level. Plane Shift. This is basically an instant teleport spell that specifically takes you and up to 8 willing creatures to another plane of existence. You're not going to be able to use this spell to teleport within your current plane, so this spell becomes extremely circumstantial and campaign specific for this purpose. But the spell has another use, and you can actually try to banish a creature to another plane permanently. That sounds extremely powerful and definitely can be, but it's something that's probably very unlikely to happen because of how this spell functions. First, you're going to need to be in melee range of the target in order to succeed with a melee spell attack. If you do, then the creature gets to make a charisma saving throw. If they fail that, then they're going to be transported permanently to the plane of your choosing. Realistically, getting within melee range of a creature worth using a 7th level spell slot on is going to be a lot to ask as it is. But then the double whammy of having to succeed on the melee save attack and having the creature fail its saving throw, it's a once-in-a-lifetime probability. I mean, if you succeed, it's definitely a powerful effect, but there are other spells that are going to take a creature out of a combat that are A, lower level, and B, have lower requirements than this one. But, you know, the versatility of this spell, of being able to use it on yourselves or able to use it on a creature, at least gives it a little bit of extra, rationale as to why you would want to take this spell. Now, to avoid having to get near a creature and touch it with a melee spell attack, you can use Distance Spell on this, and you can then be 30 feet away. 30 feet is not a comfortable range to be at, but at least it's better than being right in front and touching the creature. Now, you're not going to be able to use Seeking Spell because Seeking Spell requires a ranged attack for the spell, and this spell specifically says you're making a melee spell attack roll. Even if you use Distance Spell, you're still rolling a melee spell attack roll. I know it's kind of weird and buggy and, kind of janky, I guess, but I would rule that Seeking Spell doesn't work on this. Check with your Dungeon Master, maybe they'll allow that, and then you'll have advantage on the attack roll. And then you can use Heightened Spell to grant the creature disadvantage on their Charisma saving throw, and boom, now you've got them and you've banished them away. The next spell I want to talk about is Power Word Pain. This one is a debuff on a single target, and it looks great on the surface. The range is not great at 60 feet, but it's even worse that the spell doesn't affect creatures that have more than 100 hit points remaining. Unfortunately, in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you really don't have a way to know how many hit points a creature has remaining. And honestly, at the level that you can cast this, if a creature has 100 hit points left, it's probably going to die next round. So casting this on them, you'll get 1 round of benefit or debuff on them. Is it really worth using a 7th level spell slot on them for that? So this makes the spell kind of a gamble on whether or not it's going to work. And if it does work, you're probably not going to have much time for these effects because the creature is going to be dead. Now, possibly the most limiting factor of this spell is that it doesn't affect a creature who is immune to being charmed. At this level, a lot of creatures are immune to being charmed, so therefore, not only do they have to be below 100 hit points, but they have to not be immune to charm, which is, for a really strong creature, which is one that you'd want to use a spell slot of 7th level on, chances are you're not going to be able to hit them with it, because even if they are below 100 hit points, chances are they're probably immune to charm already anyways. But all that said, at least the spell doesn't require a saving throw, which would be amazing if it didn't have the other limitations. So, you know, in some campaigns, maybe this would work out pretty well for you guys. The effects are decent, granting some really impactful debuffs like disadvantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws, except for Constitution saving throws. Now, this is where I have a big but and a big, death knell for this spell, why I would never recommend that you take this. This spell becomes unusable because it grants a Constitution saving throw at the end of each of the creature's turns to end the effect. So, the disadvantage that you grant it with the debuff does not apply to Constitution saving throws, which means the creature is probably going to succeed since Constitution is the most common saving throw that creatures are going to be good at. So you may get 1 round of this effect on a creature anyway. So like I was saying earlier, they're probably going to die in a round anyways. Well, they're probably going to succeed. If they don't die, they're probably going to succeed their saving throw in 1 round anyway. So no matter what, you're probably going to get 1 round of effects on this if it even affects the creature. So these are just way too many limits on this spell, too many things that it requires from you for it to actually be useful in a situation in combat. Now, if you use this spell out of combat, then I would say this spell is great. Most NPCs are going to already have a lot less than 100 hit points. If you want to do some roleplay stuff with it, you can subtle spell so that no one knows that you're doing this. You're talking to the king or the shopkeeper, and you power word pain, so they're feeling pain, they're wreathing in pain, and writhing around. They'll automatically fail, and chances are they're probably not going to be resistant or immune to charm effects. So for roleplay purposes, I think this spell is fantastic, but it's a 7th level spell slot. So, and those kind of situations are far and few in between when you're going to actually use them. Now, if your campaign involves a lot of town stuff and a lot of speaking with NPCs, regular humans, then maybe I consider this spell so that I can use it outside of combat. But generally, I would say go ahead and skip this spell. Prismatic Spray. This is a blast spell with some potentially great control effects and some unfortunately ineffective damage types. When you cast this spell, any creature in a 60-foot cone rolls a dexterity saving throw and then rolls a d8 to see what type of ray affects them. So let's go over each one of these. If they roll a 1, this is the red ray. The target takes 10d6 fire damage on a failed save or half as much damage on a successful one. Possibly the second worst of all the rays. It deals damage that's subpar to other blast spells, like Fireball, which at this level is going to be doing 12d6 damage as a 7th level spell if you upcast it. So, second worst option. They roll 2. This is the orange ray. This one deals 10d6 acid damage on a failed save, half as much on a success. The damage is decent, but the amount isn't very high. Again, yellow ray, 10d6 lightning damage on a failed save, half on a success. Lightning is a good damage type, but just like the acid one, the damage amount is very low. Number 4, green. 10d6 poison damage on a failure, half on a success. Poison damage is terrible. Too many creatures are immune or resistant, especially at this level. You better hope that your enemy does not roll a 4. Number 5, blue. 10d6 cold damage, half on a success. Cold is almost as highly resisted as fire, so this is probably the third worst of all the rolls. Number 6, indigo. If they fail to save, the target is restrained, and then they make a Constitution saving throw at the end of each of its turns. If it's successful 3 times, then the spell ends. If it fails to save 3 times, then it permanently turns to stone and is subjected to the petrified condition. The success and failures don't need to be consecutive, so keep track of both until the target collects 3 of successes or 3 of failures. This one is not too bad, but it just takes way too long to petrify a target, and this usually just ends up being a 7th level slot that restrained the target. Good Constitution saves are very common, so the chances of the creature failing 3 times are really, really low. And even if they do fail 3 times, honestly, it's realistically probably going to succeed a couple of times, so it'll take actually 4 to 5 rounds in order for them to fail that 3rd save, and by then the battle is probably over. If you roll a 7, that's the Violet Ray. On a failed save, the target is blinded. Then, on the start of your next turn, it makes a Wisdom save, and if it succeeds, it ends the blindness. If it fails, it's transported to another plane of existence of the Dungeon Master's choosing, and is no longer blinded. So the blinded condition is a decent debuff, but you can do that with a 2nd level spell slot anyways. Now, the effect that occurs on the following round is potentially really good. So if they fail their saving throw, they're gone. Unlike the other ray that petrifies them, where it's going to be like 5 rounds sometimes for them to actually be petrified. With this one, round 2, they could be gone from the battle, which is pretty awesome. Unfortunately, it is a Constitution saving throw, so they are very likely to succeed that Constitution saving throw. And since it's following the round after you cast a spell, you can't heighten spell, so you can't make it more likely that they fail that save, unfortunately. Chances are they'll succeed. Once in a while, if you're able to pull this one off, great. Then, it'll be a story to tell all your friends and family. If you roll an 8, the target gets hit by 2 rays, and it's unfortunate you can't keep hitting them with more rays than just 2, so if they get hit by 2, that's it. If you roll an 8 again, you just re-roll, so there's no 3rd effect. Now, this is the only thing that really can potentially make this spell actually decent. However, the chances of someone rolling 2 8s is low, and you can't count on it. It's just random. So if you nail it, if you nail a creature with 2 8 rolls and roll 20d6 damage against them, or do this blinded effect and do damage to them, yeah, that could be really cool. But realistically, probably not going to happen very, very often, to be honest. This spell would have been good if all the effects were like debuffs with a little bit of damage thrown in. Then you could have multiple things going on at once. Or if it automatically hit each creature with 2 rays, then I would say, actually, I don't think that would make this spell broken because of the random nature of it. If this spell was creature gets hit by 2 rays, then I think the spell would still have been alright. Lower the damage amount that each ray does to 8d6 and then have them get hit by 2 rays. I think that wouldn't be a broken 7th level spell, and it would actually make it really awesome. So hey, if you want to homebrew it for that, if you're a DM, I think that would be really cool. But as written, it doesn't work that way. Careful spell works here, but even though you're going to hurt your allies, most of the effects have a secondary kind of debuff that doesn't apply on a successful save. So I guess that can be okay in a pinch. But if you don't know already, I don't condone casting damaging spells at your allies no matter what, even if they're guaranteed to only take half damage with careful spells. So I think that's definitely something you don't want to be doing. You can heighten or empower the spell, but you're not really dealing that much damage, and the effects are random, so I really don't recommend either one. And finally, transmuted spell doesn't work because you're not actually picking a damage type, and the spell doesn't have a set damage type. So the damage type is determined by the random roll of each individual that's hit by a ray, so therefore you're not actually able to use transmuted spell on here, which is very unfortunate because that would have at least helped a little bit. Overall, I think most of the effects of this spell are pretty underwhelming, and combined with the cone area and short range, it makes for a pretty weak spell overall. If you could choose the effects again, that would be awesome, but unfortunately, you can't, and therefore that makes this spell one that I probably would say that you can skip. Up is Reverse Gravity. This one's a great control and utility spell that alters gravity in an area within a 100-foot range. It's unfortunate that it only lasts a minute, which really limits the utility for exploration functions. I think this would have been great if it lasted 10 minutes. As it's currently presented in the game, with a 1 minute duration, it seems to probably work better in combat than outside of combat. The area of effect is huge. It affects a 50-foot radius, so a 100-foot high cylinder, 100-foot diameter, huge. I love that it automatically works when you cast it, and creatures only get a saving throw if they have something to grab nearby. So plan ahead. If you're casting this with your group in the area of effect, have your allies be near something that they can grab, so then you can go ahead and launch this spell. So creatures that are flying are pretty much going to plummet upwards. Check with your Dungeon Master if they think that hovering or levitating creatures are going to be affected the same way. I would rule that they're not, because they're hovering. Gravity doesn't affect them either direction, and therefore they shouldn't be falling either. Now, keep in mind that even if a flying creature falls when you cast this spell, it doesn't mean that they can't fly once they realize that polarization of the gravitational pull is reversed, because flight still allows them to fly, so they'll be able to fly upside down, I guess, but there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to figure out the gravitational pull is just reversed and then start flying again. So it's not like Earthbind that just locks them down. This is just for one round. Creatures on the ground without range attacks are basically going to be taken out of the equation for the duration of the spell, and even those who manage to grab onto something to avoid a fall are still going to be dangling. So they're not really going to be able to do that much more. It really makes this an awesome control spell against larger groups of non-flying enemies. The damage that creatures can sustain can potentially be pretty decent, but realistically, most of the time, a ceiling may be no more than 20 feet. So that makes this spell pretty unreliable for damage purposes. Don't count on doing 100 feet of falling damage on every time that you cast it, because it's probably not going to happen. So expect about 20 or 30 feet. Don't cast this as a blast or damage spell. It's not meant to be used for that. Think of the damage as just an extra benefit of the spell. Think of this more of control. The control is very, very good with this spell. And it's also situationally great for utility and exploration. You're going to have to use your imagination for the utility aspects of this, because the times that this is going to be useful, it's going to be very situational and unique. But there are enough times that you'll probably want to use this, especially while exploring caverns and things like that, castles. I think that if you're a creative individual, you're going to find plenty of times where you're going to find this spell useful. Careful spell works great. It ensures all your allies can grab onto something and avoid falling, which is basically going to help you end the battle right there. And non-flying creatures are pretty much done at that point. Distance spell gives you great range, though the range of the spell is already pretty good, so you probably aren't going to need to use that. An extended spell can boost the duration from 1 minute to 2 minutes, which is going to make it at least more decent for exploration. Next up is Teleport. You would think that this is the ultimate teleportation spell, since it's called Teleport. And it does have its place, but it's not an outright replacement for previous lower level teleportation spells. This spell can teleport up to 8 willing creatures to any destination. If the spell just ended there with a period, awesome, fantastic, great teleport spell, moving on. Go ahead and take it. But unfortunately, the spell description does not end there. This spell can be used to teleport an object instead of creatures, but not creatures and an object, unless the object is being worn or carried or something. So this gives the spell a unique differentiator from other teleportation spells. You can use this for utility and grab a large item that fits in a 10-foot cube of a certain area, and foil the plans of an enemy. So if they have this MacGuffin there, boom, teleport it away, far away, so they won't be able to use it or get to it. You can move a deadly trap. You can do that. And you can move it to a place where it won't affect your party. And you can even transport a huge hoard of treasure instead of having to cart it around. And as long as it can fit in one large container, boom, there it goes. So I think that is probably the best use for the spell, even though it's circumstantial. As far as a teleportation spell that takes you and your group to a desired location, I think that this spell is subpar to mediocre. The issue that I have with this spell is there's a pretty large chance of failure, or at least a chance that this spell is not going to get you exactly to where you want it to go. And unless you're traveling to a teleportation circle, then it works every time, if you know the sigil. Or if you have an object taken from the location within the last 6 months, then your chances are higher. But even if you're familiar with your destination, there's a whopping 1 in 4 chance that you're not going to be teleported directly there. That is pretty bad and not ideal. Pretty much the only time that I'd be okay with an outcome like that is if the party is in extreme danger. In that case, just getting away is usually what you want, and there's a 100% chance that you will be getting away from your current location, so therefore use it for that. But as with a lot of 7th level spells, that is a circumstantial thing. It's not always going to be the case that you have to get away from a combat instantly, and it may come up once or twice in a campaign. So if you're looking to travel quickly, I think there's definitely better options. If you want to teleport in combat, I think there are also better options. In my opinion, the best use for this spell are if you're trying to get an object out of an area into another area, or if you need to travel a very, very large distance and you need to have a group of 8 or less creatures come along with you. The only metamagic that's going to work here is Quicken and Subtle Spell. Both are okay and can be useful in the right circumstances, but again, overall, I would say you probably aren't going to need to use any metamagic on this. Overall, this spell, I would say, is one that I couldn't necessarily recommend. Pretty circumstantial, and I wouldn't say that it is circumstantially good. I think it's generally subpar. And finally, we have Whirlwind. This one's an interesting control spell that deals decent damage over time. The range is super, super good, 300 feet, but the area effect is not that good. You also have to select a point on the ground, which means that you're not going to be able to nail that many flying creatures with it, if any at all. This spell kind of reminds me of Maximilian's Earth and Grass, which is a spell that I really, really like. And despite the limitations of this, I still think that this spell is often overlooked and underrated. The whirlwind that you create can affect creatures and objects up to a size of medium within a 5-foot cube. A lot of control spells don't affect objects, and the ability to do so can be really handy. Again, I understand that's circumstantial, but it's nice to have that capability. You can use an action to move the whirlwind up to 30 feet, which makes it really versatile as well. And it can be combined with Quicken spell, so you can benefit from moving this and then quicken a spell each round, making you a little bit more efficient. This definitely has some utility functions as well. Since you can move objects around without getting near them, it's useful against traps and also other times when you need to just move something away from someone. Unlike Earth and Grass, this one does good damage every turn. It doesn't require an action in order for you to be dealing the damage. So you can use the spell to restrain a creature, damage it each round, and then freely do other things with your action every single round. And the creature has to waste its action to try and escape from it. Not to mention that when they're trying to escape, the creature has to make a check, an ability check, and not a saving throw, which generally is what you want, because some creatures have a bonus to their saving throw. So they'll have, let's say, a +2 to strength, but their strength save may be a +6. Well, they're going to have to only use that +2 because they're only going to be able to use their ability check. Very few creatures have proficiencies in ability checks, and therefore, if you can target an ability check as opposed to a saving throw, that's generally going to make your spell much more likely to land or to stick. And if a creature is restrained by this, when the spell ends, they take a little extra damage. Now, it's probably not going to be much, and honestly, the creature's probably going to be dead by the time this ends, because if they're in this thing for even 4 rounds, they've taken so much damage, they're probably going to be dead. But extra damage is always welcome, so it's nice that when your spell ends or you lose concentration, you're still able to eke out that last little bit of damage out of it and still, get some benefit from it. Distance spell does work with this spell, making the range exaggeratedly awesome at 600 feet. You're probably never going to need to cast it from that range, but you never know. Extended spell also works here to make this more useful outside of combat, so that's really good. You won't be able to use empowered spell or heightened spell here because the saving throws that it grants and the damage that it deals is after you've cast the spell, so therefore you cannot use those metamagics in it. But check with your Dungeon Master, as I always say, maybe they'll allow that to work. Who knows? I think this spell is a good choice. If you want to have a little control and still be able to do damage, this is a good one to pick. So you can't go wrong. There are a lot of spells for 7th level that I don't necessarily care for, but the ones that are good, like Crown of Stars and Whirlwind, I think are solid choices for 7th level spells. 7th level is definitely a mixed bag, but remember that known spells are limited, so if you wanted to get a different level spell, do it. And just make sure, if you're going to do that kind of thing, that you have a lower level spell that's going to scale well to 7th level, so at least you can use your 7th level slots to upcast a lower level spell and still get something out of it. But it's not uncommon for sorcerers to not have chosen a 6th or a 7th or an 8th level spell for their known spells and have that slot blank and only have spells they can upcast. And if that's the case, you can, upcast your spells, or you can even convert those 7th level spell slots to Metamagic if your build really depends on Metamagic for different things. So there's different things that you can do. Otherwise, you have my recommendations, and I will flash on the screen the spells that I recommend, the ones that I think are decent, and the ones that I don't recommend. And that does it for 7th level sorcerer spells. I do hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please click the like button, subscribe, check out Patreon, Discord, all that stuff. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to leave them down there in the comments down below. As always, I'm your innkeeper from the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then.